Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in this RPG series. This video is part 2 to creating a playable character, and in it we're going to be preparing our character to import it into Lumberyard. It is slightly complicated and requires a few steps, but I'm going to be showing you how to. Without further ado, let's get started. So in the last episode we exported a walking animation, an idle animation and our character out of Mixer mode. We exported them as FBX. We're now going to be importing these into a software called Blender. If you haven't got Blender installed, then I'll leave a link in the description from when you could download it from. However, once you open it, you'll be presented of a canvas of very similar sorts. You want to go ahead and delete the cuboid that was in the center of this canvas. I'm just going to go ahead and now save the Blender file, just in case we ever come back and edit it. I'm going to save it here, and I'm just going to call it character tut. And then save. Save it as a Blender file, and there we go. Okay, we're now going to go ahead and import our character. We're going to be importing the animations later. To import the character, you go File, Import FBX. You then want to locate to the directory of where you saved your character, and then you want to go ahead and open it, and then Import FBX. It will then load your character into the canvas, and as you can see here, it successfully loaded it in. So we now need to rotate our character 180 degrees, as Lumberyard requires your character to be facing a certain position for when we import it. Before we rotate it, you want to make sure that when you click the drop down on the arm next to the armature, all of the meshes are selected. Okay, so they're all selected. You now want to go ahead and click on the arc button down here, and then we want to rotate it at 180. You then can go ahead in the bottom left hand corner where it says angle, we can type 180. This therefore makes it precise. And it successfully rotated our character 180 degrees. We now want to go ahead and rename armature to root. We can go ahead and see what our character looks like by clicking on the sphere down here and then clicking on material. Give it a few seconds to load and it will load your character in with the correct materials. If we go ahead and click on the materials tab, then we click on default, then we click on the materials icon, we can see that we have a diffuse, a normal, an opacity, a specular, and a gloss. If we go ahead and click on the tops, the shoes, the eyelashes, the bottoms, the body, if your character is changing when you click on each of the parts, so if the texture is changing, that means the textures aren't all joined together. This can be fixed, which we'll be fixing in the next episode. However, if when you click on all of the parts, the material is the same, then you want to go ahead and scroll down, and then you want to go ahead and click on the little icon here, and then you want to click use file from current directory. You want to go ahead and do this for the diffuse, the normal, the opacity, specular, and the gloss. Okay, so now that we have rotated our character, we want to go ahead and export it. Before we export, we want to make sure that we delete the lamp and the camera. So to do that, we just right click delete, right click the camera and delete. We also want to make sure that our character is set to solid. So to do this, just select the sphere here and click solid. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to export it. So to do this, we do File, Export, Export as an FBX. You now want to navigate to the directory that you want to save it. And then on the side here, you want to make sure that the forward direction is set to Y forward. And then you want to go ahead and give it a name. I'm going to name mine man C, C for changed. And then you want to go ahead and click on export. Oh, before we export it, you can set this as a preset by clicking the plus button. You can then give it a name. So I'm going to name mine Lumberyard. And then you're going to go ahead and click on OK. This means every time you want to export a character, instead of having to go there, you can just click on there and then click Lumberyard. There we go. And now you want to go ahead and click on export. Give it a few seconds for it to export, and then it will have successfully exported our character in the Y forward position to the directory that you chose. I just want to recommend that you want to save this file, because in part 3, we will be coming back to this potentially to get some textures from it for texturing our character within Lumberyard. Okay, so we now need to do this for the animation. So we want to go ahead and create a new blend file. File, new, reload startup, that's fine. Delete the cube, and then click OK. Okay, so we're now going to import our idle animation. So to do this, we go File, Import FBX. We then want to locate to where we saved our idle animation, and then you want to open it. Okay, so we click on it, and then we do Import FBX. Give it a few seconds for it to load. And there we go, it has successfully imported our idle animation. The first thing we need to do is to rotate it 180 degrees like we did with our character. So to do this, we do hit the arc, then we rotate, and then 180 here. There we go, we have now rotated our character 180 degrees. This is the way that Lumberyard requires your character to be facing when we import it, and the animations. Okay, so we now need to open the sub-levels of the armature in the right-hand corner panel here. So if we click on the plus next to the armature, then the armature, and we see we have the hips here. So before we do that, we first need to do Control A and then apply rotation. There we go. Okay, so we now want to click here on the armature. We then want to do Shift S, cursor to center. Then we want to do Add Bone. We then want to click on the bone here, and then click on the bone option down here. We then want to rename the bone to root, and click enter. We then want to swap the Z and the Y, so if we set the Y to 100, and then the Z to 0. We then want to select the hip, and then shift click the root, and then do Control P, and then keep offset. This will essentially parent the hip to the root. Since this is an idle animation, this next step is not required, however I'm going to do it anyway. So click root, and then come down to the bottom left hand corner and click on the 3 diagonals, and then drag right. This will essentially open up a separate window, and we can get rid of this bar here. We then want to change this view to a graph, so we do this by clicking on the cuboid down here and then selecting graph editor. So now if we click on the drop down next to the armature here, we will see a ton of options for all of these lines. However, we want to enter pose mode, so to do this we click on pose, we then click on the drop down again, and then click on the hips. There we go. We then want to hide everything apart from the X, Y and Z on the location. So if we go ahead and do all that. There we go, we've hidden everything apart from the X, Y and the Z for the location. Some of the Mixamo animations have the Y and Z swapped around. We can go ahead and hide the X, but because we don't need that. Okay, so now if we watch it, first we need to set the end frame to be for the end of our animation. So mine is about 602-ish. But essentially you could tell where the lines end here. So essentially here where they end, you can essentially see where they are. Okay, so now if we click play, our character is moving. Okay, so we now want to minimize the Z one. We want to click on the Y. We then want to go ahead and click on key, and then we want to go click copy keyframes. We then want to go ahead and click on root. Then if we click N, then if we go up here and right click on here, and then if we click paste keyframes, insert keyframes. Now we want to hide the Z and the X. Then we want to click on Y and then click key and then paste keyframes. We then want to click on the hips again and then go back to the Y. Then we want to zoom in and navigate to the first keyframe in this animation. We then want to right click it and then press Control I. This will select everything apart from the first one. Then we want to click on X and then delete keyframe. Essentially what we have done is move the changing Y from the hips to the root bone. So we can now get rid of the graph editor by just dragging back on here. Control S to save the project. Okay, so we now want to export it. So if we go File, Export FBX, we want to make sure our Lumber preset is selected. And now we want to give it a name. I'm just going to name mine Idle C for Idle Changed. And then you want to click Export FBX. I just realized I've named mine a V instead of a C. I'm going to go ahead and change that later. But you can name yours whatever you want. Export FBX again, sorry. There we go. We have successfully exported our idle animation. Okay, so we're now going to do our walking animation. So if we open a new Blender file, just make sure you've saved it. Then open a new Blender file. Yeah, then we can go ahead and delete the cube. And now we want to save this because we might want to come back to it later in the future. So File, Save As. Navigate to the directory where you want to save it, and then name it. So mine's going to be walking. There we go, and now save as Blender file. So we now want to import our walking animation. So to do this, we go File, Import, FBX, and then our walking one, and then Import FBX. There we go, we have now imported our walking animation. Okay, so the same thing applies. We want to go ahead and rotate 180 degrees, rotate 180, and then enter. So we now want to make this bigger so we can see what's in here. We need to do Control A and then rotation, apply rotation. There we go. So essentially we want to do the same thing again. So we want to click armature, and then we want to do Shift S to put our cursor to the center. There we go. And now we want to click add. So we've now added a bone. So we come here and click bone, then click on the bone tab, rename this to root. And then the same thing again, we want to swap the Z and the Y over. So Y becomes 100, and then the Z becomes 0. So we now want to parent the hips to the root. So if we click on the hips again and shift click the root, Control P, and then keep offset. We now want to enter pose mode. So if we click pose, and we want to go down 2 sub levels to the hips, and then click on the hips, and then drag open a second window. There we go. Now we can minimize this. Now we want to enter graph mode. So we do the cube again, graph editor. Now if we hit down the armature, we want to minimize everything apart from the X, Y, and the Z location. Okay, so we can hide the X. And then we want to set the end to the end of our animation. So that is at keyframe roughly 63. So, but you want to look at what yours is at the end of. So 63, and then enter. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That's at the end of our animation. So now if we play it, let's just set it back to the beginning. And now let's play it. There we go. Our character is walking. There's our walking animation. However, when we play our animation, you might have noticed that there's a big change in the Y location, but the Z location is just moving up and down. But if we look on the graph, our Y is just going up and down, whereas on here, it's moving a long way. This is due to the animations being switched. The Y and the Z have been switched, so we need to unswitch them. This is quite simple to do, and I'll show you how to do it. So what we need to do first, we pause the animation. So what we want to do is we want to hide the Y one and show the Z one. We then want to click on the Z. We then want to go to key, copy keyframe. If you get that error, you just need to make sure that Z is actually selected. I didn't have that selected, so that's why I got that. So if we do Z and then we do copy keyframe, you'll see that, yeah, it worked. Okay, so we copied it. So we now want to go into our root. Then we want to click N, go to the top, and then right click, insert keyframe. We then want to hide the X and the Z. We then want to click on Y and then click key and then paste. Now we want to go back to the hips. We then want to click on the Z. We then want to go to the first key, right click on it, Control I, delete keyframes. So now if we click on root and then go back to the beginning of our animation. So even though our animation that we imported had the Z and the Y switched, our root bone does not. So even when we change that stuff, when we click play, it will still move in that direction. So we now want to set the end to 1 keyframe before the end of the animation. So I have 62, so I want to set mine to 61, but you want to make sure that yours is set to whatever yours is. Now we can close the graph editor, so bring that across, Control S to save. Okay, so now we want to export it, so we go File, Export, FBX. Then we want to choose our Lumberyard preset, so it's facing the Y coordinate. We want to give it a name, so I'm going to name mine Walking C. And then we want to do Export FBX. There we go, we have successfully exported our walking animation. Okay, so we now have finished exporting our walking animation, our idle animation, and our character. This is the end of part 2 of creating a playable character. In part 3, we will be importing it into Lumberyard, setting it up with the W, A, S and D keys and getting the textures to work. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.